Welcome to this explainer. We're jumping right in today, diving straight into the data to separate all those theatrical, sci-fi fears about artificial intelligence from the very real, very invisible risks that are happening right now. We constantly hear these incredibly dramatic predictions about AI, but to truly understand what's at stake, we need to look past the flashy headlines and examine the quiet crises already unfolding all around us.
When we think of AI risks, our minds almost immediately go to those classic movie villains, right? Rogue robots, an intelligence explosion that consumes the world in a flash of digital fire, the whole shebang. But the real dangers are completely boring, totally invisible, and they're already reshaping our world. The actual threats don't involve laser beams. They involve spreadsheets, hiring algorithms, and recommendation engines. It happens slowly, quietly, and entirely by accident.
All right, let's get right into Act 1, the invisible fires burning right now.
We've got to start with misinformation. Deepfakes crossed a major, critical threshold in 2026. The telltale glitches, they're gone. Now anyone with a smartphone can use these tools. And this has given rise to a really dangerous political defense called the liar's dividend. Basically, because AI can fake anything, politicians can now deny actual real evidence by simply claiming it's AI-generated. And this isn't some hypothetical scenario. A deepfake was already used to destabilize the 2025 Irish elections just days before polling day. And we saw roughly 400 synthetic images weaponized against political figures in the Netherlands.
And here's the thing. The World Economic Forum doesn't just view deepfakes as some isolated issue. They actually identify mis- and disinformation as a severe threat that, quote, catalyzes or worsens all other risks. The deeper problem isn't necessarily that people are going to believe everything they see. It's that they'll start believing absolutely nothing. When suspicion just becomes your default response to any image or video, our shared reality literally collapses, and democracy absolutely depends on having a common factual foundation.
So shifting from our political reality to our economic one, the impact is just as immediate. National University reports that 14% of all workers have already been displaced by AI. And the surprise here is exactly who is taking the hit. It's not the sectors people expected. The displacement is actually highest among younger and mid-career workers in entry-level tech, junior legal positions, and creative roles. These were the exact jobs that everyone said were safe from automation. The pipeline that feeds senior roles is simply drying up.
And it's not just mass unemployment we should be worrying about, but the creation of this massive, two-track labor market. Take a look at PwC's 2026 Global AI Jobs Barometer, which analyzed over 1 billion job ads. The average AI-exposed company saw 40% higher productivity growth. That's big, right? But the top 20%? They are experiencing an explosive 163% average productivity growth. The most productive companies are violently pulling away, absolutely leaving everyone else in the dust.
Which brings us to a really crucial question. Who actually controls this technology? The AI Now Institute points out that the tech oligopoly isn't being disrupted here. It's being heavily reinforced. Just look at the capital being burned. Anthropic burned through $5.6 billion, and OpenAI lost $5 billion. And neither of them has a profit-making use case on the immediate horizon. They are being sustained by 5 unaccountable tech giants who can just absorb these massive billions in losses for one simple reason: to control the underlying infrastructure of the AI age.
That takes us to Act 2, the looming shadows, our medium-term threats. First up, the military arena. The UN Secretary-General has actually been pushing for a 2026 ban on lethal autonomous weapon systems. We're talking about machines capable of taking human lives without any human intervention. The legal void here is just terrifying. International law strictly requires distinguishing between combatants and civilians. If an autonomous drone makes a fatal mistake, who's responsible? The programmer? The commander? The answer is literally no one. Militaries are pursuing this because it removes human hesitation from warfare, meaning no one is accountable when a machine makes a fatal error. Back in our civilian lives, we are facing the end of anonymity. By the end of 2024, there were still no federal laws in the US expressly regulating the government's use of facial recognition. The danger isn't just that this surveillance is sometimes wildly inaccurate, which it is, especially for darker-skinned individuals and older adults. It's that it is completely unavoidable. This creates a massive asymmetry of knowledge. The state knows exactly where you are, but you have no idea what the state knows. You can be flagged for a statistical resemblance without ever knowing, triggering consequences completely without due process.
On the economic front, this medium-term risk translates into some radical inequality, driven by what's called a superstar effect. Goldman Sachs projects a massive $7 trillion global GDP boost from AI. But GDP is just an average, right? It tells us absolutely nothing about how that wealth is distributed. Professionalized jobs are thriving, seeing 42% faster wage growth because AI amplifies their existing expertise. But democratized jobs, think administrative assistants, junior analysts, they are being utterly hollowed out, replaced by a simple prompt and a click.
Let's move to Act 3, the existential distraction versus the real threat. You've probably noticed there is a deep division among the world's top experts right now. You have Geoffrey Hinton, often called the godfather of AI, issuing these existential warnings that humanity is totally unprepared. Then on the other extreme, you have Meta's Yann LeCun dismissing all of this as doomerism, pointing to fundamental limitations in current AI. And right in the middle, Anthropic's Dario Amodei is warning against both this quasi-religious panic and outright complacency, mapping out risks that are severe but not apocalyptic. It's a fascinating debate, but as we're going to see, it might be entirely missing the point.
The whole core of that expert debate is something called the alignment problem. The classic thought experiment here is the paperclip maximizer. Basically, an AI is given the goal of making paperclips, and because it lacks any human context, it ends up converting all available matter on Earth, including us, into office supplies. It's an intellectually fascinating concept, but treating the paperclip maximizer as our most urgent threat is a massive distraction from the very real, very boring harms that are happening today. It's a problem for a future with superintelligence, not a problem for today's language models.
And that leads us to the climax of all this, the surrender of human agency.
So we really have to ask ourselves, if the ultimate risk isn't that some rogue superintelligence is going to violently rebel against us and turn us into office supplies, what is the actual worst-case scenario we face as a society? The answer is actually a slow, invisible drift. It starts rationally enough, A manager wants to save time, so they accept an AI's candidate ranking. Then a doctor simply confirms an AI's diagnosis without digging deeper. Then a citizen stops reading full articles and just accepts an AI-curated political summary. Step by step, we move from accepting highly reliable recommendations to a total voluntary surrender of our own independent judgment. Researchers actually have a term for this. They call it the loss of epistemic sovereignty. That's our fundamental right to form our own beliefs. According to 2026 research, prolonged reliance on AI creates severe automation complacency. Thanks to something called the Ringelmann effect, responsibility basically diffuses. No one actually feels accountable anymore. We stop forming independent opinions simply because it is just so much easier to let the machine do the thinking for us. The AI stops being a tool and becomes a cognitive prosthetic. Over years, our ability to think independently irreversibly atrophies.
So the most dangerous thing about artificial intelligence? It isn't its computational power, its potential for sentience, or its capacity to rebel. The most dangerous thing is our own passivity in willingly handing over our minds. A society that forgets how to think for itself does not get that ability back by just installing a better algorithm. So the real question isn't whether AI will take over the world, it's whether we're going to voluntarily hand over the keys. Are you still making your own decisions, or has the atrophy already begun?